Good evening, and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Town Pension and OPEB Trusts Oversight Committee meeting of March 21st, 2023. This meeting is now called to order. If staff could roll our rules of decorum and civility.
The public is welcome to participate at Town Council meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meetings is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. At each meeting, the following expectations of civil conduct shall apply. 1. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the council agenda. 2. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at council meetings. 3. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at Town Council meetings. 4. All public comments at the Town Council meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. 5. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the mayor may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the council exiting the chamber. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the council would return to the chamber and the mayor would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a council meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code Section 403. These expectations of conduct also apply to meetings of all town boards, committees, and commissions.
Thank you. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Eni?
Here.
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Councilmember Hudis?
Here.
Vice Mayor Badami?
Here.
Mayor Cheristo?
Here. And I need to read a statement. I'll be participating remotely in accordance with AB 2449 under the circumstance of just cause due to a contagious illness. There are no individuals present in the room with me, including any individuals over the age of 18. Thank you.
Thank you. We hope you feel better. Moving on to our consent item. Would any member of the public wish to comment on any item that's on our consent? We have one member in the audience, and I don't see a hand raise, nor on Zoom, so I will close public comment and look to council members if they wish to comment or make a motion. Councilmember Rennie.
Yeah, okay, Chair. I will make the motion to approve the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 3.
Councilmember Moore.
Second.
Passes. Okay. Councilmember Hudis and Councilmember Vice Mayor Badami also approve. If we can get a...
I was going to do a roll call.
Yes, a roll call, please.
Sure. Councilmember Eni?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Hudis?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Badami?
Aye.
Mayor Cheristo?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to other business, which is item number 4, we're to receive an actuarial presentation on CalPERS, and I'm going to look for staff for the report.
I'm sorry, excuse me, did the council do verbal communications already?
No, we did not. I'm going to open this up for verbal communications. And again, we have one member of the public. Would they wish to speak in the audience with no one on Zoom? I see no one wishing to speak, so I will close verbal communications and move on to item number 4, which again, we're looking to staff for a report. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, council members, Vice Mayor and Mayor. Gita Ungvari, Finance Director. The item in front of you to receive the actual presentation of CalPERS analysis of June 30th, 2021 valuation report was prepared by Foster & Foster, the town actuary consultant firm, and identified amortization basis for future potential additional discretionary payment. In the Zoom meeting, we have Mary Beth Redding, who is going to provide a presentation. I just want to tell public that attachment 2 contains the slides for the presentation. Attachment 1 contains the full report, and attachment 2, and we are ready for Mary Beth. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita.
Thank you.
I just want to, okay, good. I can see the council. Thank you, council members and Mayor, for having me here tonight. I'm going to do a brief review of the most recent CalPERS actuarial evaluation report, which we have. It's as of 2021, June 30th, 21, so almost 2 years old now. Next, we'll give you some idea of where we expect the town's contributions to go in the future, and then talk about our analysis of some options the town has for pre-funding some of the liability. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I wanted to start with an illustration of the investment returns CalPERS has realized over the past 30 years. This chart goes back to 1997, and the little green dots on the lines are each year's investment return. So you can see the good years and the bad years, the dot-com bubble, the Great Recession in 2008 and 9. But most importantly, to the numbers we're looking at, on the far right-hand end of the graph, you'll see a 21% return in fiscal year 21 and a minus 7.5% return in fiscal year 22. So even though those returns are quite variable, the rolling average returns, the reddish brown line, as well as the 20 and 30-year average returns are all slightly above CalPERS's assumed rate of return. So on long-term average, they're doing okay, but with quite a lot of variability every year. Next slide, please. So CalPERS has been working hard to do things that will improve the long-term funded status of all its plans. Most of these, unfortunately, involve asking employers to pay more money into the plan. That's really their only source of funding, other than trying to get investments to earn more. So employer contribution rates have been increasing over the past several years, are projected to continue increasing. And at the same time, they are trying to pay off new pieces of the unfunded liability faster, and that adds more volatility or year-to-year change in the contribution levels. A little bit of good news is PEPRA. This was the pension law that was passed for employees hired after January 1st, 2013, quite a while ago now. And at that point, we had said it would be a small increase in pension costs over the very long run and would take a long time to have any impact. Well, the good news is that we're actually starting to see it impacting the town's contribution rates in a small way, but it is there, and that's nice to see finally. So this impacts rates as we have more and more of these PEPRA classification of employees. Among miscellaneous employees, we now have, 2021, close to 2 years ago, a little bit over half of the miscellaneous employees are in the PEPRA category. About 40% of the payroll is PEPRA. Safety is a different story. About a third of the safety employees are PEPRA employees, and a little under 30% of the payroll. So the way I look at that is that there are more future savings to come for safety than there are for miscellaneous. Miscellaneous, we're starting to see it. More of safety is still to come. Next slide. So talking about what we saw in the 2020 evaluations, I wanted to start with what we see for headcounts of employees and retirees. This is the miscellaneous group. The red bars are the number each year of active employees, active town employees going back to 1994. And the blue bars are the number of retirees. And what you can see is the number of retirees is increasing very steadily over time to the point where we have about twice as many retirees as active employees. And this is really quite different than we see in other miscellaneous plans around the state. The more retirees you have, the more volatility it puts into your future costs. Next slide. The safety plan looks even different. Again, the number of active employees is more or less steady over time, but the number of retirees is very much larger than the number of active employees. And again, much more so than we see at other agencies. Next slide. Looking at the plan's funded status, this again is miscellaneous. There are three groups of bars here representing the funded status of the plan at June 30th, 2020, 2021, which is the last real numbers we have from CalPERS, and our projection of 2022. What you see is that the plan became, let's see, the colored bars on the left are the plan's liabilities, and the green bar on the right is the amount of assets the plan has. So if those two bars were equal, the plan would be 100% funded, but they're not. In 2021, the funded status improved quite a bit over 2020 because of the good investment return, and the funded status has decreased projected in 2022 because of the poor return. Next slide. Similarly, for safety, again, the funded status is much better at June 30th of 2021, but most of it is lost again at June 30th of 2022 because mainly of the poor investment return for 2022. Okay, can I have the next slide? So the next thing I want to walk through with you are our projections of contributions looking forward over the next 30 years. These are a little bit different than the numbers CalPERS publishes. We put everything we know into these numbers, including statements from investment advisors that returns are going to be lower over the next 10 years and higher after that. We've included the impact of future PEPRA hires into the numbers. And most importantly, we have reflected the town's budget projections for payroll. Okay, next slide. So this is a miscellaneous plan. The green line represents the most likely place that we expect contribution rates to be. They're about just under 30% of payroll right now, meaning for every dollar you spend in payroll, you're sending about 30 cents off to CalPERS. After the first couple years, the rates are projected to increase to about 33% of pay. And then gradually until the early 2040s, the rates will decline. The reason the rates are declining is because your contribution rates are high. You're putting a lot of money into the plan to pay off the unfunded liability. And then in the 2040s, we expect that the rates will settle down to about 10% of pay, really the long-term cost of the plan. What we've illustrated here, though, is not just the most likely place we expect rates to be, but sort of the range where they might be to give you a feeling for how much variability there might be in there. So the area between the little boxes underneath the green line and the little boxes over the green line is where the rates come out about half of the time in our modeling. So half of the time it will be somewhere between those, the lines above and below the green line. And it's a really wide area. Which means that there's a lot of uncertainty about where the rates will be, and they could be quite high. Okay, next slide, please. This is a similar chart for safety. These rates are after we take into account the negotiated employee cost savings. And because it's a safety plan, rates are higher. They're about 55% of pay now, and they peak most likely at about 76% of pay. So considerably higher than the miscellaneous plan. But again, over time, as town is putting more and more money into CalPERS, the rates drop until they hit their long-term rate of about 17% of pay, most likely. Again, the green boxes above and below the line are indicating the potential variability where rates are half the time. And you'll see that the upper peaks on those are 95% of pay or so. So again, it is potentially very high rates and not, unfortunately, unusual for a safety plan. Next slide. This is a chart that shows contributions in dollar amounts through on the far right-hand side, 2033-34. The current year, the town's projected to have contributions of $7.5 million. And when we go out to 2033-34 fiscal year, close to $13 million in CalPERS contributions. So you can see that the increase over that period of time is quite steep. And the next slide. The last slide I wanted to show you on contribution projections. I've been talking a lot about volatility. Your plan has more expected volatility than many. What does that mean? So the green line here, this is a miscellaneous plan only. The green line is the same line we've been looking at with projected contribution rates over the next 20, 30 years. The blue line shows where those rates would have been if in 1 year, if in fiscal 22, CalPERS had earned 6.8% as they expected instead of their minus 7.5. So one pretty bad year. And if you look at the difference between the blue line and the green line, it's on the order of 11 or 12% of pay for many, many years differential in the rates. So it really has a very big impact. One poor year. We're hoping that you'll get good years to balance it out, but that is what leads to a lot of year-over-year variation in contribution rates. I have the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about options the town has to pre-fund the CalPERS liability. And we were asked to look at what would happen if an additional $1 million was contributed to CalPERS at the end of this year. I'm going to walk you through the chart. So the top two rows are looking at what would happen if that was paid into the miscellaneous plan. And when you give extra money to CalPERS, you have choices, many choices of how to apply it. And we've chosen kind of bookends, applying it to the shortest basis, the shortest outstanding pieces of your unfunded liability, or to the pieces of your unfunded liability with the longest payout period remaining. And there's options in the middle, but I think it makes most sense to think about the two outside ones. So if you were to put $1 million into CalPERS, apply it to the shortest outstanding miscellaneous basis, the savings would be $114,000 on top of the $1 million you put in. The present value of that savings is $60,000, and you would see an immediate reduction to next year's contribution of $400,000. So it's a very big reduction in contributions. It's going to be very short-lived. If, on the other hand, you applied that $1 million to the longest outstanding base, you would save $954,000. So almost the same amount as you put in on top of the $1 million. The present value of savings would be about $430,000. You would see a reduction to next year's contribution of $73,000. So you get much more savings because you're applying or spending that $1 million over a much longer period of time. You think of it as invested longer. Can you go back to the previous slide? Okay. So that's why the savings are more, the reduction is less. If we look at the bottom two rows for safety, the numbers are similar, but because the bases are different for safety, the numbers come out a little bit different. In particular, if you apply it to the longest safety base, you get $1,035,000 of savings, $452,000 of present value. So the absolute most savings comes from applying it to the safety plan. Okay, now we can change the slide, please. These are illustrations of the change in contribution if the $1 million is given to CalPERS. This is first as the miscellaneous plan. The green line is the same one we've seen before. The red line shows the impact on the contribution if the shortest amortization bases are targeted. You can see there's a big difference in the lines, but only for the first couple of years. The blue dashed line shows the impact if the longest spaces have the $1 million applied to them. And that's a very small impact. You can hardly see the difference at all. It's a very small impact over a very long period of time. The next and last slide shows the very same thing for the safety plan, less impact for the short bases. Overall, even though there are dollar impacts to the contributions that are not negligible relative to your total contribution to CalPERS, it's not a huge impact. But it does make a significant savings over time again. That is my last slide. Are there any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I will look to council members to see if there's any questions. Councilmember Hudes.
Thank you. The slides that you shared tonight, I guess there are 14, were those shared earlier as a set? Or were they part of the 80-page report?
They were, all of the slides in here were part of the 80-page document with a little bit of consolidation, and they were also part of the presentation that went to the commission.
I see, but as a set of the 14, were they shared with the council in advance of this?
Yes, they were attachment 2 to your
Attachment
staff
2,
report.
okay, thank you.
So you have it, and then the full report is attachment 1.
Right, okay, I was into attachment 1, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions from council members? See none, I will open up the, Councilmember Moore.
Go ahead and open up public comment, and then I'll...
I was going to open it up to the public, so if you'd like to comment or wait.
Yeah, I can wait. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Would any member of the public wish to comment on this item? See no hands raised, I will close the public comment and look to council members for comments. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So in our staff report, one of the things we're looking at as well is the different strategies for funding or for the investments. So we're talking about a lot of volatility here and kind of how one poor year can really upset things back and forth. Would moving from strategy 1 into strategy 2 potentially decrease some of that volatility?
So for your CalPERS pension plan, you don't have a choice of strategies. You only have the one big fund that CalPERS is managing.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Hudes.
Thank you. So I had a question related to that. First one's about volatility. And what is the impact? What would we do differently if there was less volatility, is my first question.
I'm not sure I can answer because I'm not managing the town's finances, but my comment would be if there were less volatility, you would be a little more certain of what the year-to-year contributions would be, and it would be easier to budget.
Councilmember Hudes?
Yeah, since this seems to be one of the challenges of what we're dealing with, how does the volatility of CalPERS compare to the volatility of other large state funds? State funds of other large state funds like this of other large states.
I haven't compared their volatility calculations, but a lot of the volatility is coming from CalPERS moving into private equity, private debt. I guess what I didn't say is that the way to avoid volatility is typically to have more conservative investments. So you're hoping you're trading more volatility for a higher long-term return. Most large plans are doing the same thing, and we note that they all are having more and more money invested in things like private equity.
Okay, but just to clarify, this volatility that we're dealing with, how does it compare to the volatility of, let's say, other states like New York or other states that are managing similar size funds.
So I don't know the actual numbers. I haven't seen the volatility calculations that they would all do for their investment mix. But when we look at what other large state plans are investing in, they're all doing whatever they can to try to increase their returns. So you see them all moving over time much more into equities and into private investments. So I would expect that they would be similar.
Okay, thank you. That may be something to look into next year.
Councilmember Rennie.
So you just mentioned private equities. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal today that a lot of pension plans are moving away from private equities. Do we know what, and CalPERS wasn't mentioned. I think they mentioned Maryland and a couple other state plans. What is CalPERS have any plans, do we know, to pull back on private equity investment?
Not that they're saying publicly. They made their last change in investment allocations in November of 2021, and they really only do it every 4 years. They don't say a lot in between that time.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. And so I'm new, so I'm still figuring this out. So our only real tool here, because we can't touch how things are invested, is just how much we're putting in and paying down. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Rennie.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. So we do have another tool that we used to use and we decided we weren't using. We had our own outside of CalPERS IRS 115 trust, which allowed us, you were talking about 1 versus 2, rather than paying these down, we could stick those in our own and theoretically make as much money as it is in CalPERS and then later use it to pay. It has to be used to pay pensions, kinds of things. So that's another option, another tool that we could use. Instead of rushing it into CalPERS, we could do the Plan 1 or the Plan 2 with any cash that might be headed towards CalPERS.
Okay. Any further comments? Questions? Councilmember Hudas.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to understand the situation with the large number of retired members. You commented that Los Gatos was not, at the mean of that, but had a larger number. What would the root cause of that be, and what actions might a government take to limit the large number of retired members?
Good questions. I don't know in your town's case what the root cause is, but typically you see numbers like that in very old cities and towns, ones that have been around for a long time, so you have a lot of retirees. And that would be my guess. The other time you see it is sometimes in safety plans where a city or town used to be a full service town and then has contracted out for either police or fire. So they've kind of artificially reduced the number of current active employees. I suppose you could contract out your miscellaneous employees too and sort of artificially reduce that. So those are the two biggest reasons we see a lot of retirees compared to active employees. But I want to say it's not a bad thing. I mean, the reason you have these retirement plans is to provide retirement benefits to retirees. So we like having retirees. We've been planning for them. It's not unexpected, but it adds volatility to your costs. You can think of all those retirees as having a big pool of money allocated to them, and that's kind of outside of your budget, and that pool of money can have asset gains and losses that kind of move your budget numbers around, and those people aren't employees, so they're not in your payroll.
Councilmember Hudas.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And just on the second question, are there things that cities would do to reduce that mix and thereby reduce the volatility?
There's really no way to legally to prevent you from having a lot of retirees other than not hiring the employees in the first place. Once you have employees, they have to be in CalPERS, and eventually they're going to retire and become retirees.
So, but over the long term, contracting out services might affect that. Is that correct?
It would affect your CalPERS costs. What I ask people to think about is that typically wherever you're contracting those employees is also that entity is going to have its own retirement costs that you're going to have even less control over than you do over CalPERS.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any further comments? Councilmember Rennie.
So I wanted to bring, and we're talking about investment returns, I wanted to bring up something that's related. Maybe the town attorney will tell me this is not on the agenda item, but I wanted to talk about our management of our short-term cash. Is it okay to bring that up as a related item?
Could you elaborate on how it's related to the CalPERS?
Well, here we're talking about investment returns, when we might put money in. So this would be, improving our returns on the cash we have before we put it in, for example.
In that case, I think it is related to the analysis of how you fund the CalPERS.
Okay. So if I could, you recall in the Finance Commission, they brought up the idea that we have, I think you said 15 million sitting in Bank of the West, for example. And they made the comment that we could do, we're in the right kind of environment right now to safely do a better job in managing our short-term cash. For example, I looked on Schwab today, you can buy a 1-month CD for 5%. So do we really need all of our $14 million in the next month, for example? If you put 10 million, I would think you could plan at least 1 month ahead, for example, and you could do 3-month CDs and make a little bit better. My question really is about, does staff feel like they can take advantage of that right now, or do they need changes in our investment policies or a motion from us potentially tonight to allow something like that? Particularly, if you think about a CD, if you do it in bunches of 250,000, is going to be FDIC insured, so it's a almost riskless way to increase our return on our cash. It's probably sitting there making less than 1%. So I know it was a long question, but I wanted to give everybody else the context.
Thank you for the question. And this question was raised before and also in the council meeting. And staff started to do the cash flow analysis. As a first step, we already moved $5 million from our checking account to the LAIF account. We don't need further council action because the investment policy guide us how we can invest a ton money properly. So we don't need further guidance. And the staff is already working on that.
What percent is LAIF getting right now? Isn't that like 3.5? When we're
I think it was between 2 and 3.
Yeah, and CDs, which are safe if you do it in small batches, are twice that.
We definitely will evaluate all the options.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Seeing none, we may be looking for a motion, I believe. So I would be looking for council members for a motion. In particular, I believe we have to make a decision between accepting the Finance Commission recommendation or the town's recommendation about paying down the longest base for the miscellaneous plan versus the safety plan. Would any council member like to make a motion? Councilmember Rennie.
Actually, I wanted to comment on that. I'm not in agreement with the Finance Commission's comment that we should pay down the longest basis. And let me explain my thought process in that if we were a bank and our job was purely to make money, it does make sense to pick whatever would give you the most money. But in fact, we're in the business of delivering services. We want to manage our money well to help us deliver services. And I guess if you could put back up probably slide 13, it'll help me describe why. That's where what it shows in slide 13 is the blue dashed line cutting off part of the peak and some of the curve as it comes down into the later years. And my point is, let me wait till the curve comes up. I think it was probably 13 is what I wrote on my page here. And so what I was looking at on this is, so if we have a basis that's 20 years long, that puts us out into 23, which is out towards the bottom of this curve. My concern is, as trying to make sure that we can deliver services in Los Gatos, is when we've got so much money going into our pensions, will we have enough money to be able to continue to provide the services and keep the employees and have extra money left over for capital? So in my opinion, the top of that curve is what we're most worried about, where we might have the most difficulty with our mission, which is to deliver services to the town. As you can see, the blue line, as it goes down the back side, it's shaving a bit off when there's much less pressure on the town to pay as much money into pensions, and there would be more available to go towards active services at the time. So that's why as long as we've been talking about this, have always advocated for something that was more medium term, that would slice the top off of that. So you would take some of the blue line, the difference between the blue line and the back part of the curve, and stick it up at the top, basically, and maybe a little bit in the front also, doing a little more shaving of the top when we're under the most stress. So I would argue we want to pay down something medium term that targets the top of this curve. And we've done that before. And I know those that are experts on finance keep saying, let's do long term and get the most gain, but that's not what we're in the business of. Thanks.
Councilmember Hudas.
So I don't know that I heard that full discussion at the Finance Commission. I'm wondering, through the mayor, whether Councilmember Rennie could explain whether that dialogue was had at the Finance Commission, because they made a recommendation that was different than that.
Councilmember Rennie, if you would like to elaborate, and then after that, I'm going to look to Mayor Risto with her hand up. Yeah, she was also at that meeting. We had a short discussion where, again, I said that I thought the medium term was better, and they insisted long term was better because you get more return. And two of them were, pretty aggressively telling me I was wrong, but I didn't get the opportunity to give the explanation that I just gave. The argument I just gave, which is we're not in the business of investment returns, we're in the business of delivering service, and that should be our first priority. Thank you. I look to Mayor Risto.
Thank you. This conversation occurred at the Finance Commission meeting, and I think Ms. Redding did an excellent job explaining why we would want to pay the longer term off. In my mind, we have short-term obligations, but we also have an obligation for long-term planning for the town, and interest is interest. And the longer we're paying it, the more interest we're paying. So if we can pay off some of those longer term obligations, we're in a much better position, certainly in the long term, but it doesn't hurt us a lot in the medium term either. I don't know if, Mary Beth, if you'd like to go through the explanation again, because I completely agree. And I feel like this is what I feel strongly we should be doing, is paying off the longer term obligation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look to council and see if they would like for Mary Beth to elaborate. Maybe just a nod of the head. Yes, Mary Beth, if you could elaborate on that for us.
Okay. I understand where the council member is coming from, trying to target the peak levels of contributions. Unfortunately, if you went from like paying off a 26-year base to a 17-year base, you're not really going to see very much difference at all in the dollar amount of contribution savings. And the reason is because you can't target it just at the peak years. You're going to have to spend it in year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way through year 17. So at the risk of raising a different topic, the Section 115 trust that the town used to have is really a better tool if you want to be able to save your money and really focus it on paying it in just specific years. You can that allows you to control that. If you give the money to CalPERS, you really don't have that control.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. No further questions, comments. I'll be looking for a motion.
Vice Mayor, it's important for the Oversight Committee to know we still do have our pension 115 trust. So we've drawn it down, but we did not close the account. So if that is the preference of the Oversight Committee, there are additional options, and I asked Director Ongvari to elaborate.
Thank you. So we started with the PARS trust, which we draw down and close, we pay to CalPERS, and we opened the CEPPT trust, and this is where we transfer the money. So we transferred $690,000 last year, and we transferred another $690,000, which is approximately $1.3 million. So it's an option for us just keep the money there and let it grow, and choose an option to pay to CalPERS in a different time.
Thank you, Ms. Ongari. Councilmember Rennie.
I would just add to that a little bit that there's two options in the CRBT, and we chose, I believe, the more conservative one, which, according to, it's going to be, as Councilmember Moore was talking about, there's going to be less volatility and fluctuations in it, but its long-term return is supposed to be less than CalPERS. The other one that we're not in is supposed to pretty much match CalPERS. So something to think about if you want to go that direction. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
You are correct. The only thing that we are talking about CEPPT and the SERP, the other one is for OPEB, and the CEPPT for the pension.
Okay. Thank you. Still looking for a motion?
And
Town Manager, Ms.
Thank
Pravetti?
you. Thank you. I just wanted to add that we can certainly bring to the Oversight Committee a change if you want to discuss whether or not you want to change strategies. That is not on the agenda tonight, but we would be happy to bring that for a future conversation for the committee.
Would that be in line of a continuance then?
We would work with the mayor to schedule our next Oversight Committee meeting. We typically meet quarterly. However, we could certainly set another meeting sooner than the next quarter, or do it earlier in the quarter.
Thank you. Councilmember Rennie.
So if I heard correctly, we have 1.2 million that's sitting in the CP, whatever the right letters are. I'm used to the CRBT one. The CPPT one is already in the little more conservative investment account. So if we did nothing tonight, it would continue to grow at about a projected 4%, I think is 4.5%, something like that, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
Okay. So nobody's jumping to make a motion. So I'll make a motion that we leave our money there for now and discuss this further about whether we want to change to a more aggressive one. keeping it outside of CalPERS or whether we want to go to CalPERS and whether we want to go midterm or long-term and whether somebody wants to try to convince me that it long-term is, because I would probably vote against long-term just on the principle, but, you know, maybe I'm really missing something. So my motion would be to leave it in that account for now.
Thank you for the motion. Councilmember Hudes.
Thank you, and I appreciate the bringing this issue forward. And I guess the question I would have is, would the maker of the motion be open to having the Finance Commission take a look at it before it comes back to this commission?
That's fine with me.
Then I'll second the motion.
Okay, any further comments? All right, I will ask for a roll call from the clerk.
Councilmember Rennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Hudes?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Badami?
Aye.
Mayor Chair Risto?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. So we are at the end of our meeting, and this meeting is now adjourned. We'll see everyone at 7 o'clock.